In the shallow waters off Java, USS Blenny was executing an attack no submarine was ever designed for. She was on the surface and charging at her target in reverse. At the stern, a sailor was barely hanging on over the side in the water, working a lead line and calling depth numbers up to the conning tower. The keel had inches to spare. Blenny was a Balao-class fleet submarine with 1,526 tons of steel and 10 torpedo tubes, built to hunt Japanese capital ships at 400 feet beneath Pacific destroyer escorts. 9 months of combat in some of the most contested water in the Pacific brought her to an insane moment. Too shallow to dive, too crazed to stop, and now measuring the bottom with a rope. USS Blenny arrived in the Pacific in late 1944, when the easy targets were already gone. She was built and commissioned as the U.S. submarine campaign against Japanese shipping in the Pacific was reaching its peak. The escorts that remained had learned how to keep a submarine under pressure. They knew that they didn't need to win a gunfight. As long as they could force a boat to spend air and battery underwater, they would be more likely to be crowned as victors. As such, one of the most important assets Blenny brought to the fight was her endurance. As a fleet submarine, she carried heavy fuel stores and spares to keep her own systems running far from support, which meant she could sit on a patrol line for weeks instead of being pushed back by logistics. Her diesel-electric system was the key. On the surface, diesel engines gave her range and speed while charging the batteries. Once she dove, she lived off stored power. This characteristic of hers didn't spare the crew from danger, but it gave them the option to endure it for longer stretches of time. She could make about 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots, and her surface speed, about 20 knots, let her close at night when submarines did their best hunting on the surface. Her other advantage was depth. Blenny was a Balao-class boat, built with high-tensile steel in the pressure hull. Many earlier fleet boats used lower-strength steel and had less diving margin. Since Blenny's test depth was about 400 feet, where seawater exerts hundreds of pounds per square inch, the high-tensile steel ensured the hull could spend more time underwater without deforming. That extra margin gave the captain a place to go when depth charges started walking in. It also forced escorts to guess at settings instead of simply pinning her to a shallow band of water. But before any fighting could take place, her crew went through training at the Fleet Sound School in Key West. They practiced picking out a merchant ship versus a destroyer at a distance and learned to catch that split second when a hunter swung in to close the gap. Above all, they learned what it meant to make Blenny a silent boat, one where not even the faint tremble of screws through seawater could seal their fate. On November 10, 1944, Blenny set course west for Luzon in the Philippines. She hadn't seen combat yet, but she was already expected to perform like a seasoned boat as soon as she arrived. On December 1st, Blenny finally found the first real opportunity to prove herself. She made contact with a Japanese escort vessel and worked herself into position. This wasn't the kind of target submariners preferred, especially as their trial by fire. An escort's only reason to exist was to hunt submarines. It was designed to turn quickly and close fast. Once it suspected an attack, it didn't have to protect the cargo or maintain course. It could go straight to the counterattack. Blenny still took the chance. She inched into position, closing until the angle was good enough to trust, then fired. The torpedo ran clean, but it ran too wide. Whether it slipped under the escort or lost the angle during the run didn't matter. What did was that the escort reacted at once, snapping into a hard turn and charging straight toward the patch of sea where Blenny had given herself away. In less than a heartbeat, the order to dive turned the inside of the boat like a switch. All the men moved their stations in absolute silence. Without even thinking, they secured anything that could make noise, trying to make the boat disappear into a cloud of quietness. The boat pitched down as ballast tanks flooded, and the surface noise fell away as the hull slipped under. Then the depth charges started going off around her. The first ones hit the area close enough to make the entire hull shudder and force the lights to flicker. The escort came back through the same water and dropped again, working a pattern meant to box Blenny in. The captain knew if they wanted to survive, they'd need to go even deeper. He pushed her deeper, fighting for depth with small adjustments. A hard turn would stir the water with noise and hand the escort a clearer solution. A burst of speed would drain the battery they might need later to surface. Eventually, her depth paid off. After a long stretch of shaking and waiting, the propeller noise above slid away, with the last charges detonating farther and farther away. Blenny was still intact. She'd spent battery and air to buy depth, but she'd lived long enough to learn how costly a miss could become. Still, she'd proven she could survive. Now she still had to prove she could hit back. Blenny was 311 feet long, but inside, the boat felt like a narrow steel tube. The space people actually lived in was tighter than the boat's width suggested, and every passageway turned into a choke point when men had to squeeze past each other with tools or trays or wet clothes. The boat never stopped scraping people up. Her passageways were tight, which led to elbows getting skinned on cork-covered bulkheads. There were 73 enlisted men and 8 officers on board, and none of them had room to spread out. Men slept wherever a bunk could be fitted, with most of the racks stacked right alongside the torpedo compartments. At any given point, a tired man could climb into his rack with a warhead only a few feet away and fall asleep. Fresh water was guarded on board. When it came time to ration it, the batteries came first. To obtain it during long patrols, the boat had equipment to distill fresh water from seawater in stills. Whatever was left would become drinking and cooking water. Washing came last. Showers weren't real showers. The crew had to manage condensation from the air conditioner. Even then, each man got only half a bucket for their personal hygiene. If they were lucky, that happened twice a week. Air was the other constant problem. The atmosphere on the boat could be comfortable when she was submerged, but only for short times. Eventually, she had to come up, even if the sea above was full of planes and patrol craft. 5 days later, on December 6th, she was moving along the surface of the ocean when a Japanese plane came in low in her direction. The bridge watch caught it late. They had just enough time to ring the alarm and go down the hatch. The boat was already angling down when the bombs hit. 2 deep thumps off the side that kicked water up in heavy sheets and slapped it back onto the casing. With the hatch dogged, the ballast tanks filled with water, and Blenny left the surface behind. She came out clean, but the whole incident reminded her of the importance of keeping herself to the depths rather than testing her luck in the open air. A week later, on December 14th, she got a chance to put her newly earned knowledge into practice. Her target was a 300-ton sea truck, a small cargo craft, moving along the coast. A torpedo was a poor fit for this, being too slow, and not even guaranteed to arm properly against a light hull. It was also too expensive to waste. If Blenny was going to take this target, it had to be done topside. The deck gun was the only practical way to finish it. She surfaced hard and brought the gun to bear. Blenny put rounds into the target until its motion broke up. The sea truck slowed, sagged, and began to settle by the stern. Blenny stayed up only long enough to make sure it wouldn't recover. Then she was already sliding away, disappearing before a radio call or a searchlight could turn the coast into a trap. Later that same night, she found a ship that could actually fight back. Coast Defense Vessel number 28, about 800 tons. Once again, she chose to surface as part of her tactic. If anything, she felt she'd be practicing her control like this. By doing so on a night like this, she could run like a small warship and shape her own approach calmly until she forced the range down on her terms. When the ship's shape was all her crew could see in the dark ahead, that's when Blenny fired. The impact was solid enough to make the target jump, and the sea around it lit up with the flames from the explosion. Blenny turned away immediately, already expecting the chase and ready to dive. But the guard ship was already sinking, leaving only wreckage and disturbed water behind. Blenny cleared the area without slowing. She'd spent the first part of the patrol learning how easy it was to get trapped. Now she'd finally crafted a method that could lead her to victories, while still allowing her to get away. What Blenny needed was a target worth spending hours of battery and airtime to reach. On December 23rd, a transport slid into her periscope view. Blenny stayed down and made the long, careful crawl to intercept. every correction had a price. A few turns of the screws, a few degrees of rudder, and the battery gauge moved. The boat could stay submerged, but not for free. The captain watched the numbers and watched the target, trying to spend just enough power to arrive on time. The transport held course, and Blenny kept closing. The periscope came up in quick, clipped looks, then dropped again before it could leave a feather on the surface. Inside, the boat was quiet. When the range finally came down and the angle stopped drifting, the tubes blew. The boat kicked once as the fish left, then went still again. Blenny didn't keep the periscope up. She dropped it and let the boat go quiet. There was nothing to watch that mattered more than staying hidden. The crew listened and counted, tracking the run by time. In due time, the hit carried through the pressure hull like a heavy knock. A few seconds later, the sound above changed. They could hear metal tearing and water forcing its way in. The transport was clearly losing control and coming apart. Blenny didn't stay to confirm anything. The sinking drew attention, and attention drew escorts. She eased away, swimming deep below the surface on a new heading. Post-war records later tied the sinking to Kenzui Maru, a ship of about 4,156 tons. On December 27th, she fired again, this time at an unidentified freighter. At the moment, it looked like she'd done some damage, but she couldn't stay up long enough to confirm it. With only a brief window at periscope depth, it was hard to tell whether the flash she saw was smoke or just spray before Blenny had to dive again. After the war, Japanese records did not confirm this claim. With fuel and torpedoes spent, Blenny was ordered to turn south for Fremantle. She'd been gone for 64 days, and she still had enough fuel and rations to crawl back on her own. On February 5th, 1945, Blenny went back out and headed for Japanese-occupied French Indochina, where ships moved in convoys, and their escort stayed close. On the 20th, she picked up a convoy, screened by 2 destroyers. Blenny tracked from below and tried to build the attack the slow way, with short periscope looks and long stretches blind. All throughout the encounter, the geometry kept collapsing out from under her. Each time the firing setup made sense, the destroyer crossed the lane and forced Blenny to hold down and let the moment pass. In the end, no torpedoes left the tubes, since it became impossible to ascertain a shot worth spending. Her non-action didn't spare her from danger, though. The destroyers turned back through the area anyway. Something gave Blenny away, most likely a sonar contact or a brief sign at periscope depth that was enough to make them commit. The first depth charges went off while Blenny was still trying to clear the track. Once again, the captain pressed her as low as she could go in controlled steps. She slipped deeper, pushing into denser layers of water, where the pressure rose quickly. Above her, the destroyers circled and dropped again, working back and forth across the same patch of sea. The explosions rolled through the hull, close enough to make the metal ring, but never quite close enough to break it. Her high-tensile steel couldn't stop the explosions on its own, but it did increase the depth Blenny could use without the hull starting to give. This forced the destroyers to set their charges on guesses instead of certainties. Even so, the ocean kept erupting for a long time. Then finally, the spacing changed. The crew could hear the detonations landing farther and farther off as the propeller noise thinned and slid away. Eventually, it faded altogether as the destroyers broke contact and returned to the convoy. Blenny came out of it without the victory she wanted, but with something just as important. With 2 for 2, she'd learned that her depth margin was real. With that knowledge at hand, Blenny returned to her patrol pattern. On the night of February 26, 1945, Amato Maru, a 10,238-ton tanker, was running fuel along the coast near Cam Bay. From topside, it looked like another night transit. The sea was low and black, allowing the ship to keep its speed and continue moving unopposed. Down below, Blenny was already set up to stay with her. She stayed submerged and closed in short steps, keeping the boat steady while the fire control picture got built piece by piece. Amato Maru stayed centered, totally unaware of what was under it. She never saw the submarine. She never got a warning. The first sign was the torpedo. It hit low and ripped the hull apart. One of her fuel tanks had been split open. Oil poured out into the sea and caught fire. The wrecked ship carried forward for a few seconds on pure momentum. Blenny only saw that her target hadn't been stopped, and she wasn't going to wait for it to recover. She fired again to finish the job. The second detonation hit harder. The tanker's speed fell off and didn't come back. The bow slowly settled, and the list increased until it was clear the ship wasn't going to level out. On board, men tried to fight the fire and control flooding at the same time, but the ship was built around the cargo that was now burning. Such damage wasn't something a crew could patch in the middle of the night. The flaming surface made a marker out of the whole scene. Flames rose and spread across the surface where the fuel had spilled, and smoke rolled over the ship and flattened in the wind. The tanker became a beacon, visible for miles. Any escort in the area would have turned toward it, unaware that the submarine that caused the damage might still be close. Just as she had learned to do, Blenny slipped away at a considerable depth, proud about getting a big enough result to justify the risk and the torpedoes spent. Behind her, Amato Maru kept burning as she sagged lower. When she finally slipped under, she took thousands of tons of fuel with her. Thanks to Blenny, Japan had lost precious oil that was already in short supply. 2 days later, on February 28th, Blenny was ordered to Subic Bay to reload. This time, she'd been out for a little over 20 days, and she'd fired enough to run her racks down. Better yet, she'd come through without a bent shaft or a cracked plate. In waters where one lucky bomb or one close pattern of charges could end a patrol in seconds, simply staying intact that long was its own achievement. Blenny went back out with a full load of torpedoes, and within days, she found the kind of morning she'd been dreaming of. On March 20th, 1945, near dawn, the coastline was still mostly in darkness. Blenny ran shallow, looking for her next targets. The sea looked flat, until her periscopes caught a low shape sliding along the shore. It was small, but it was no doubt moving supplies to somewhere the enemy needed them. Blenny stayed down to track it until the geometry stopped shifting. When the firing picture locked, she shot her newly acquired torpedoes. After she fired, the hull gave its familiar kick. The hit came back through the pressure hull as a heavy jolt that made loose gear jump. When the periscope came up again, spray was still hanging in the air, and the little ship was no longer making way. The wake had fallen apart, and the bow sat wrong. That was Yamakuni Maru, a small coastal cargo ship of about 500 tons, now motionless on the water. Most boats would have left immediately. Blenny stayed in the area anyway, because she was hungry for more, and the day was still young. She let the confusion from the sinking hide her actions. She shifted position slowly, keeping her speed down to avoid attracting eyes toward her. While the shore defenses were still scrambling, another ship slid into the lane. This one was larger and not as clean a target, so Blenny stayed on station longer to get a more dependable firing solution. When she fired, they knew right away it had connected. The ship was sinking. Number 21, Nanahin Maru, roughly 834 tons, was gone. Two sinkings that were so close together were basically an invitation for a fast, organized response against her. And still, Blenny didn't rush to leave. She went deep, opened the distance, and let her depth buy room, while the surface guessed at where she'd gone. Later on, a third ship appeared in the same track, Hosen Maru, weighing roughly 1,039 tons. By that point, the risk was higher, and the room to maneuver was smaller, but Blenny still wanted more. She was well aware that a careless correction could put the boat under a search pattern that wouldn't be solved by depth alone. But the war spoils surpassed the danger, so she crept in, waited until the shot was as certain as conditions allowed, and fired. The target was listed, and then went under. After weeks of living with the non-stop risk of detection, 3 sinkings in one day was a real boost on board. The crew had spent weeks counting battery hours and choking down bad air, just to live through attacks they couldn't answer. Now it felt like the first time the risk had paid back in full. That day, the boat did what she was designed to do, use depth and patience to leave a mark against the enemy. But every mile closer to shore took water away from her. And yet, filled with self-confidence, Blenny challenged herself to repeat this feat in a harsher environment. Now she needed to know how well she'd manage when the ocean takes away the one advantage she was built around: depth. On May 25th, Blenny crossed paths with a small sub-chaser close to shore. In water so shallow, her normal escape move was off the table. While depth had saved her before, this time it worked against her. But she was not about to back down and slid in anyway. This was what she was looking for. Ballast took her lower until she was awash. Then she backed in stern first so the enemy stayed ahead of her screws. On the fantail, a sailor worked a lead line over the stern, sounding the water and calling out how much room they had before the keel scraped bottom. The captain held the boat on that edge. Even if a single bad guess could put the keel into mud and leave her stuck under the enemy's guns, everyone on board trusted Blenny. The sub-chaser kept moving along the coast, confident in the shallows. Blenny let it pass and waited until the stern tubes had the angle. This time, the torpedoes left from the back end of the boat, without the comfort of deep water behind it. At the moment, the crew believed they'd gotten the sub-chaser. They estimated it at about 170 tons. Unfortunately, some post-war accounting methods often ignored losses under 500, so this claim remains unconfirmed. According to witnesses on board, it was unlikely the enemy vessel had been left unscathed. 5 days later, a small lugger showed itself close to Blenny. She assumed there was no need for torpedoes and didn't want to waste them anyway. As she surfaced, she swung the deck gun onto the target and opened fire while the boat rolled in daylight swell. The round splashed short, then walked in. Splinters and spray kicked up as the target tried to keep moving. Blenny kept firing until the lugger slowed down and gave the first indication of settling. When it was clear it wasn't going to stay afloat, Blenny broke off and cleared. Not long after the lugger went down, another contact showed itself in the same bright daylight water. Hokokumaru, a 520-ton coastal cargo ship, still moving along the track. By then, Blenny had no depth to spend. There was no clean escape if a patrol craft came charging in, no deep layer to sink into and let the hunt drift past. If someone caught the periscope feather or picked up a sound contact, Blenny would have to fight the bottom or surface into gunfire. Even at that disadvantage, she stayed submerged and worked the approach. In between periscope looks, the boat ran on the plot and the sound picture while the shoreline moved past her, always too close for comfort. The captain kept the screws slow and steady to avoid making any noise. The crew watched the battery as if it were fuel. If they were forced to run, it would decide whether they got away. When Hokokumaru finally filled the scope, there was no room left to misread the angle. Blenny held her course long enough to make the shot honest, then fired a torpedo. The periscope came back up to a ship already losing headway. Hokokumaru's bow dipped as smoke climbed. The hull sagged lower until the sea closed over it and the surface went quiet again. Blenny slipped off the coast and put the shallow water behind her, this time using distance rather than depth to break contact. Even when everything was against her, Blenny remained intact and kept downing ships. On June 5th, she left for the Java Sea and set course for Fremantle, arriving 4 days later for refit. The war was breaking apart when Blenny left Fremantle on July 5th, but the water ahead was still unforgiving. After confirming that not even shallow waters could stop her, she went north toward Malaya's east coast, along coastal lanes where diving deep no longer offered a reliable escape. On the 11th, she ran into a sea truck and came up to use the deck gun. The first round splashed short, but eventually they hit. Wood flew off the hull, and the sea truck's wake broke apart. It tried to turn away, but it couldn't build speed. Blenny stayed on it until the craft slowed, sagged, and settled. Then she broke contact before a patrol boat or an aircraft could be pulled in by the gunfire. On July 16th, she attacked a converted gunboat with torpedoes and reported it sunk, though later records did not confirm the loss. A smaller vessel running with it gave her another opening, and Blenny shifted to gunfire at a range that made hits hard to judge. She tried to close, but the target kept its distance. Blenny couldn't afford a long chase in shallow water, so the captain broke it off. After that, the patrol slid back into small contacts, short windows, and constant caution near the coast. Blenny stayed in the area long enough to finish her orders, then turned away from the shoreline and headed to the exit. She left her patrol area and set course for Subic Bay, where she arrived on August 15, 1945, the day before war hostilities ceased. Blenny's war ended with her pressure hull intact and the entirety of her crew still on board. After the fighting stopped, she returned to San Diego late in November and kept serving for years, but time caught up with her. She was a World War II boat in a navy that kept evolving forward, so her name was struck from the Naval Vessel Register on August 15, 1973. After that, she spent years tied up and moved from port to port, until 1987, when the Navy chose to donate Blenny for use as an artificial reef off Maryland. On June 7, 1989, the Navy cut openings into the hull, placed charges, and scuttled her off Ocean City, Maryland. Blenny veterans rode out on a charter boat and watched the ship slide under for the last time. Ultimately, she earned 4 battle stars for her World War II service. She survived every close call thrown her way and still managed to keep coming home. The only reason she stayed down for good was that she was ordered to.